who exactly are the groups that are rallying today? I mean, are they EDL, the offshoots? How are they organizing? And as misinformation continues to spread online, we're asking, how do you de-radicalize someone? If you see a friend or a loved one going down a dangerous rabbit hole, what should you do? Well, let's talk to Joe Mulhall, Director of Research at Hope Not Hate, which has been tracking these rallies. Welcome to the program, Joe.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to talk to you. What do you make of what we're seeing at the moment? Because every so often in this country, we get surges of hate and extremism, not just on the far right, but in on other parts of the political spectrum. But this feels different.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, what we're witnessing right now and the events we've seen since that horrifying attack in Southport on Monday reflects the nature of the modern far right. These demonstrations that we've seen, and we obviously saw horrifying events, rioting in Southport. We saw racist violence in Hartlepool. Right now, there's a range of ongoing demonstrations in Manchester, Leeds, Hull, Stoke. They reflect the nature of the modern far right. There isn't a single organizer that has planned all of these events. There isn't a single organization like the English Defence League, which no longer exists, that is organizing all of these events. It's a much more decentralized far right scene at the moment, and that's what's being reflected in these events. It's thousands of individuals engaging with online far right figures, engaging in online far right networks, and then ad hoc and spontaneous events are being organized around the country by individuals that are plugged into these far right networks online.
And how much more of a challenge does this present organizations like yours, which wants to monitor these activities, and of course the police, which wants to infiltrate, intercept, and stop this kind of activity?
Yeah, it makes it extraordinarily difficult. I mean, back in the days when something like the English Defence League did exist, it had regional branch structures, it had leaders, it had membership lists, same with parties like the British National Party. And of course, there are small little groups like that do still exist in the UK, like Patriotic Alternative, the fascist group that's been active, and their activists have been at numerous events this week. But it makes it very, very hard now because any individual, an anonymous individual, can set up a Facebook group or Telegram channel or just tweet out an image calling a demonstration anonymously. No one knows who's behind it. And it's very, very difficult to then work out which ones will have large numbers of attendees, and which ones will have small numbers, which ones will bubble out into violence, because it's done so ad hoc. And then once something is called, it's just things switch on to things like WhatsApp channels, etc., which again are very hard to monitor. So it makes it hard to find out who's planning the events, but also it makes it very difficult to work out which ones are going to be well attended and which ones won't.
Yeah, and we hear from mainstream politicians who are on the right, whether they're from Reform UK or indeed former Home Secretaries, that these people have legitimate concerns. I mean, let me quote Nigel Farage. He said, "This is a reaction to fear, to discomfort, to unease that is out there, shared by tens of millions of people." What exactly is this call, "We want our country back," about? What exactly is the bouquet of gripes, if I can put it that way, that these people share?
It's a really, really dangerous set of rhetoric coming out from people like Nigel Farage and elements of the Conservative Party. In one sense, of course, many people are angry. People are angry at the cost of living, are angry at the status quo, angry at hospitals, schools, etc. You name it. There is a lot of anger and resentment out there. And of course, people are also very, very angry, rightly so, at the horrifying attack on Monday. But to turn around and explain away these far-right events that we've seen since Monday, the legitimate anger, as it keeps being called, doesn't explain why people were throwing bricks at a mosque in Southport. It doesn't explain why people were punching people of colour in Hartlepool. It doesn't explain the riotous scenes last night in Sunderland. These people are whipped up by misinformation and disinformation, by racism, by far-right ideology and rhetoric. And it's deeply irresponsible to explain these events away. There is a huge difference between accepting that many people in the country are angry about a range of issues and saying that that anger legitimizes the discrimination and prejudice that's come out the other end of it in the form of racist violence this week.
Yeah. And Joe, if the perpetrators of this violence, of these activities, were of African, Caribbean, or Asian background, we'd be calling them race riots. It'd be without question. And I've seen many such uprisings, disturbances being described thus over the years. Are these race riots? Because the young people involved are 100% white, pretty much.
They're primarily white, yeah. I mean, there's a huge amount of demonstrations ongoing, and there is a kind of a diversity of people on them, but primarily you might be able to say that they are white. One thing I will say is that we haven't picked up. We've been monitoring every one of these demonstrations, and between yesterday and tomorrow, we're expecting about 35 across the country. Every one so far that we've looked at, we have found racist language being used, racist chant, especially directed at the Muslim community and asylum seekers. One of the things that started perhaps as this trigger was this awful attack in Southport, but the demonstrations and riots and violence that we're seeing is now based around a much broader set of issues, which is anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalism, and anti-government rhetoric.
Right. Now, there's a lot of people who disappear down rabbit holes. They start out with what they might think is a legitimate gripe, and before you know it, they're going out there saying, we want our country back and get back to where you came from. If you notice a family member or a friend becoming radicalized like this, what do you do about it? How do you de-radicalize somebody in this situation?
Yeah, sure. It's always really important to draw a distinction between those figures like Tommy Robinson, like Nigel Farage, that are pushing far-right rhetoric, and those individuals that are susceptible to that messaging, and those people that may slowly be being kind of inculcated by it. There's a few things to do. One of the things to do is trying to find out where that anger comes from. And in many cases, as I say, that there is legitimate anger about people's state of living, about the cost of living crisis, about all this range of issues. And it's possible to say that anger is legitimate, but to explain why the way that anger is being articulated is both incorrect but also unacceptable. And the other thing that's really important here is finding the right messenger. In some cases, it's just as important as the message to turn around and say, yes, of course, you're angry that these 3 children have been killed in this horrifying attack, but it makes no sense to then throw a brick at a mosque. The message is extremely important to try and cut through, but you also have to find the person who they're going to listen to. That might be yourself, that might be you as their parent or their brother or their sister or their auntie or their uncle, but it might be their football coach, it might be their boxing coach, it might be their religious leader. The messenger that will speak to them is just as important as the message. So finding out what you think will work, speaking to them, but also who they're going to listen to.
Joe Mulhall, Director of Research at Hope Not Hate, thank you very much indeed for spending some time with us. There's a clean-up underway in Sunderland where far-right protesters clashed with the police last night. Rioters targeted a mosque, burnt buildings and a car, and further rallies are planned across the country today. The new Labour MP for Sunderland Central, Lewis Atkinson, is helping with the clean-up efforts and joins me now with his reflections on last night's violence. Lewis, I've seen a picture of you in the Times today, just sweeping away some of the debris with other local people. What's the mood this morning? What was it like?
Good afternoon, Henry.
Good afternoon.
The mood in Sunderland today is of disgust at what happened last night, but a real determination and understanding that the tiny minority of troublemakers last night, yobs, are not probably from Sunderland, and they certainly don't represent and speak for the people of Sunderland. The spirit here today is very much of togetherness, of determination that Sunderland has got a really bright future, and it's got a bright future of communities working together here. That's what we showed this morning when we had people, from the Bangladeshi community there, people from all the different areas of Sunderland. We had international students there as part of the clean-up. And Sunderland people are not afraid of hard work. That's one of the things that we're famous for with our industrial heritage. And that's what we did this morning. And we'll continue doing that, not just on the streets, but in terms of working with our communities to build the future that Sunderland deserves.
That's right. Why or how can you be so sure that the people who engaged in the violence last night, who attacked the police, who burnt a police station, are not from the area?
Listen, there will have been some from Sunderland, but clearly this was a far-right stoked protest where the likes of Stephen Yaxby Lennon was tweeting about it. The fact, I'm afraid, unfortunately for us, that it was the only such so-called protest that was due to take place yesterday evening across the country, I think meant that people who of a certain persuasion who wanted a Friday night of yobbery were attracted to Sunderland. We know that there were far-right banners demonstrated during the events of yesterday night, including a North East spin now off from the old EDL. So, that gives me the information that I have, that this is not about normal, hard-working people of Sunderland that were engaged in that behaviour.
One would hope not, Lewis, but why do you think they targeted Sunderland? What is it about the community there that made them think, this is ripe for our kind of activity, our kind of far-right activity?
I'm not sure Sunderland was specifically targeted. There was a spontaneous, suggestion that there was a protest, and I think the far right latched onto that, and it happened to be on Friday night. But listen, Sunderland is a working class area with, levels of
deprivation.
People having deprivation. People have had a hard time. People, would like to have better living standards, would like better housing and better NHS. But none of that is about last night. Is about none of that. To me, what's happened in the last few days is a total use of disinformation and active disinformation about the tragic events of Southport earlier in the week, and people that want to stir trouble and hate among our communities have picked up on that, and that reached Sunderland last night in the way that it reached other communities, unfortunately, earlier in the week.
How concerned are you, Lewis, that even if these people have come in from outside, they may have planted some very malevolent seeds that may, in time, germinate and cause further trouble in the weeks to come?
I'm hopeful that quite the opposite is true, that actually the common disgust that I think Sunderland people feel about last night actually reminds us that we are a community made up of many different cultures and parts, and we need to, like any community in any city, need to continue to work on understanding each other and thriving together. And, I want a city, and the people of Sunderland want a city where everyone in the city feels safe and prospers in the future. And actually, last night just makes us and me even more determined to deliver that.
Yeah. And what about the policing? In some parts of the country, they've had Section 34 orders, like in Manchester, for example, which gives the police extra powers. In others, Section 60 orders. What are the police doing in response to last night's violence today?
Well, as you'd expect, there's a continued police presence in Sunderland Centre today, and they're also rightly continuing to pursue people that were rioting last night. Just because people didn't get arrested last night absolutely does not mean that they won't be getting the full force of the law thrown at them today and over coming days. There's a lot of CCTV footage, a lot of intelligence, and I have the absolute assurance, the Home Secretary who I spoke to last night has been absolutely clear about this, that we will be throwing the full force of the law at anyone involved in the thuggery that we saw last night. But there's a visible police presence that's reassuring to the population of Sunderland. But I would say Sunderland is open. I'm doing this call from one of our great restaurants in the city centre.
And people are moving around freely, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're next door to the Empire, which is a great theatre. They're expecting 1,500 people in tonight to see Abermania, I think it is tonight. Sunderland is open, and some of the irony is the area where they congregated last night is there's construction sites around it, because we've got really positive investment, private business investment coming into Sunderland, and you can actively see the scaffolding of our future around us with better jobs, great culture, etc. People, the yobs that visited last night and are hopefully now going to be soon languishing in jail cells, are not going to ruin that. People of Sunderland are stronger than that.